Welcome. Settle in. Let the sounds of the city at night wash over you. Not the gentle patter of rain, but the omnipresent, low hum of the atmospheric scrubbers that give this city its manufactured air. Hear the distant, percussive hiss of pneumatic transports, and the murmur of 1,000 conversations in a dozen languages, filtered through personal synth translators. You are in Port Zenith, a city of vertical ambition, a monument of steel and light built on a foundation of shadow and scrap. A place where gravity is a suggestion for the wealthy in the sun-drenched apex, and a crushing reality for everyone in the gloom below. And tonight's story, Mind Market Mishap, begins in that gloom. It is a story about the desperate bargains we make when the walls are closing in. Our guide on this journey is not a chromed mercenary or a ghost in the machine netrunner. He is not a person of interest to anyone of importance. His name is Finn, and he is a student. A number in the vast, gray machine of the Port Zenith Technical Institute, learning a trade that promises a life of quiet servitude to the city's infrastructure. His world should be one of schematics and diagnostic exams, of cramped lecture halls and the faint smell of ozone from overworked servers. But the brutal, neon-lit reality of the streets has breached the quiet walls of his academic life, and it is dragging him down into the depths. He is moving through the city now, not with the aimless shuffle of a student, but with the tight, focused steps of the hunted. The chill he feels is not from the air, but from the cold dread of a deadline he cannot meet. He descends through the city's layers, leaving the relatively clean, corporate-sponsored levels behind. The light changes from the sterile white of the Institute's corridors to a chaotic, feverish bath of color from the advertisements that plaster every surface. But these are not ads for cars or drinks. Here, in the unregulated zones, they sell pieces of the soul. A flickering hologram of a laughing couple promises the memory of a perfect first kiss, on sale for a limited time. A stark, text-based that offers a doctorate in xenolinguistics, a 30-year career compressed into a 3-hour download. Finn averts his eyes, his stomach churning. He passes people with the telltale signs of cheap neurotech, the slight facial twitch of a corrupted personality overlay, the 1,000-yard stare of someone who has just sold a month of their life for rent money. He is heading for the source of it all. A place called the Agora. He was drowning in a debt that was not his own. A life debt, they called it. His father, a man who had always chased impossible dreams, had borrowed heavily from a local enforcer named Vex, the leader of a brutal street gang known as the Rust Dogs. The dream, like all the others, had crumbled, and his father had simply vanished, leaving Finn to inherit the consequences. Vex was not a patient man, and the deadline for repayment was a tangible threat, a promise of pain that overshadowed every moment of Finn's life. Desperation was a corrosive acid, and it had been eating away at him for weeks. It led him now to the Agora, the city's infamous mind market, a place where memories, skills, and experiences were the currency. His plan was simple, born of late-night panic, by a basic combat skill, just enough to defend himself, or maybe even to enter the illicit fighting pits in the Undercity and earn the money to pay Vex off. He navigated the crowded alleys, ignoring the more reputable-looking stalls with their clean interfaces and certified credentials. He could not afford them. He was looking for the bottom feeders, the data scrappers who dealt in corrupted files and black market skills. His search led him to a cramped, dimly lit den tucked away behind a noodle bar. The air inside was stale, smelling of old electronics and cheap synth ale. The walls were a chaotic mess of wires and mismatched tech, blinking with a constellation of tiny, colored lights. Behind a counter cluttered with scavenged hardware sat Glitch. He was a small, twitchy man, his skin pale from a life spent indoors. One of his eyes was a cheap, flickering cybernetic replacement that seemed to lag a half-second behind his natural one, giving him a permanently distracted look. He eyed Finn with a mixture of suspicion and predatory interest. You're not a tourist, Glitch stated, his voice a raspy whisper. What do you need? Finn's throat was dry. He leaned forward, trying to keep his voice from shaking. I need a skill. Combat. Close quarters. Something effective. Glitch's lips twisted into a smirk. Effective costs. You look like you count your credits before you buy a bowl of noodles. I don't have much, Finn admitted, his hopes sinking. But I'm desperate. Desperation was the word Glitch had been waiting for. It was the key that unlocked his special inventory. He rummaged under the counter for a moment before producing a small, obsidian-colored data shard. It was scuffed and scratched, its edges worn smooth. This, Glitch said, holding it up as if it were a jewel, is a bargain. Top-tier military CQC. Krav Maga Systema, the works. All in one convenient package. Finn stared at the shard. What's the catch? It's a bit fragmented, Glitch said, waving a dismissive hand. A salvage job. The data is all there, but the indexing is shot. The upload might be a little rough. That's why I can give it to you for a price a street rat like you can afford. Every rational thought in Finn's mind screamed at him to walk away. Corrupted data could lead to anything from severe migraines to full-blown psychosis. But the image of Vex's cruel, smiling face flashed in his mind, and his caution evaporated. He emptied his pockets onto the counter, a meager pile of coins and low-denomination credit shits. Glitch's good eye glanced at the pile, then at Finn's desperate face. He scooped up the payment with a grimy hand. Done, he said. The chair is in the back. No refunds. The immersion chair was even more decrepit than the ones in the main market. The synth leather was cracked and peeling, and a low hum from a jury-rigged power supply vibrated through its frame. Finn's heart pounded against his ribs as he settled into the cold seat. Glitch clamped a neural interface headset onto his temples. The metal was cold and smelled faintly of antiseptic. Try to relax? Glitch said with a distinct lack of sincerity. He slotted the obsidian shard into a port on the side of the headset. This might feel a little strange. Finn closed his eyes. For a moment, there was nothing. Then, a feeling of vertigo, as if he were falling from a great height. The darkness behind his eyelids was replaced by a chaotic torrent of light and sound. It was not the clean, orderly installation of a new skill. It was a brutal, violent flood. He felt sensations that were not his own. The solid, comforting weight of a rifle stock against his shoulder. The cold, slender grip of a knife handle in his palm. The rough texture of brick against his fingertips as he scaled a wall. He tasted the bitter tang of adrenaline, the coppery taste of fear, not his own, but that of his prey. Fractured images, sharp and painfully vivid, assaulted his mind. A rain-swept rooftop overlooking a glittering city. The crosshairs of a scope centering on a man laughing at a party. The silent, suffocating darkness of a cargo hold. The blinding flash of an explosion. Each image was paired with a surge of cold, detached professionalism. There was no anger, no panic, only a chillingly calm focus. It was the mindset of a predator, an apex hunter, and it was pouring into him, overriding the terrified student he was. The onslaught was too much. His consciousness fractured, and he fell into a deep, dreamless black. When Finn awoke, he was lying on the thin mattress of his sleeping pod. The grimy den and the twitchy form of Glitch were gone. Sunlight, thick with the yellow smog of Port Zenith's morning, filtered through the grimy porthole of his tiny apartment. A splitting headache hammered behind his eyes, a painful, rhythmic pounding that seemed to be in sync with his own pulse. He sat up, his body aching as if he had been in a fight. His pockets were empty. The credits were gone. For a horrifying moment, he thought the entire thing had been a scam. Glitch had taken his money, strapped him into an empty chair, and left him to wake up with nothing but a headache. The despair was a physical weight, threatening to crush him. He had lost everything, and he was no closer to solving his problem. He swung his legs over the side of the pod and stood up, a wave of dizziness washing over him. He stumbled towards the small hydration unit in the corner to get a glass of water. His hands were shaking. He filled a cheap plastic cup, but his trembling fingers fumbled, and the cup slipped, plummeting towards the floor. And then something impossible happened. Time seemed to slow down. The falling cup, the arc of spilling water, everything moved with a strange, syrupy grace. Finn watched it detached. His body, however, did not watch. It moved. Without any conscious thought, without any instruction from his panicked mind, his left hand shot out. It was not a clumsy grab or a desperate lunge. It was a movement of impossible fluidity and precision. His fingers intercepted the cup an inch from the floor, closing around it gently, not a single drop of the remaining water sloshing over the rim. He stood there, frozen, the cup held perfectly steady in his hand. He stared at his own fingers as if they belonged to a stranger. He had never been coordinated. He was the kind of person who tripped walking upstairs, who bumped into door frames. This grace, this inhuman reflex, was not his. A cold shiver traced its way down his spine. It had worked. The data was in his head. He brought the cup to his lips and drank, his hand perfectly still. As he swallowed the recycled water, another change began to assert itself. It was subtle at first, a shift in his perception. The constant, dull roar of the city outside his window was no longer just noise. He could pick out individual sounds with startling clarity. The whine of a specific maglev train on the High Line 2 blocks away. The conversation of a couple on the street-level plaza 20 stories below, their words as clear as if they were standing next to him. The faint, rhythmic click of a loose panel on the side of the building across the chasm, buffeted by the high-altitude winds. His vision was sharper, too. He glanced out the porthole, and the chaotic sprawl of the city was no longer just a view. It was a tactical map. His mind automatically began to process information he had never considered before. The rooftop opposite had 3 potential sniper perches. The service gantries connecting the buildings offered 4 distinct escape routes from his level. The flow of pedestrian traffic on the plaza below formed predictable patterns, with choke points near the transit station entrances. He felt a wave of anxiety, a rising panic that was entirely his own. This was too much. This was not a simple combat skill. This was a complete sensory and psychological overhaul. He backed away from the window, his heart hammering. His tiny apartment pod, once a sanctuary, now felt like a cage. A coffin. His mind, unbidden, was cataloging its structural weaknesses, the flimsiness of the door lock, the vulnerability of the ventilation shaft. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to block it all out, trying to find the quiet, simple mind of Finn the student. But closing his eyes was a mistake. In the darkness of his own mind, there was no escape. Instead, he found a memory. It bloomed behind his eyelids with a reality that was more intense than his own life. It was not a dream, not a fleeting image. It was a full, sensory experience. He was there. He was looking through another man's eyes. He felt the cold, biting rain on his face, the damp chill seeping into the high-tech fabric of his coat. He was lying prone on a rooftop, the rough texture of gravel pressing into his chest. Below him, a lavish corporate gala was in full swing inside a penthouse apartment, visible through a vast, floor-to-ceiling window. Men and women in expensive clothes laughed and drank, their forms hazy through the rain-streaked glass. He felt the cold, hard weight of a sniper rifle in his hands. He knew its name, its caliber, its effective range. the precise tension of its trigger. He felt a profound sense of patience, a calm that was utterly alien to his own anxious nature. It was the patience of a predator that knows its prey cannot escape. He was not nervous. He was not excited. He was simply at work. The assassin's gaze swept the party, dismissing the unimportant figures, his mind processing threat levels and potential complications with cold, inhuman logic. Then, his eyes locked onto his target. A man with silver hair and a self-satisfied smile, a high-ranking executive from a corporation whose name echoed in the assassin's mind, Omnicore Solutions. The assassin adjusted his scope. He felt the smooth rotation of the dials under his fingertips. He inhaled slowly, his heartbeat slowing, his entire world narrowing to the circle of glass and the man within it. He felt the cold kiss of the trigger on his index finger. He felt the controlled, practiced pull, the contained violence of the rifle bucking against his shoulder, the hollow satisfaction of a task completed. The memory shattered. Finn's eyes flew open. He was on his knees in the middle of his apartment, gasping for air, his body drenched in a cold sweat. The phantom smell of cordite, the gunpowder from the rifle shot, filled his nostrils. He scrambled backward until he hit the wall, his mind reeling. This was not a fragmented combat skill. Glitch had not lied, not entirely. The data was fragmented, but it was not just a collection of techniques. It was a life. A whole life, with all its senses, skills, and memories. A cold, brutal, and terrifyingly efficient life. He had tried to download the skills of a soldier. Instead, he had acquired the soul of a notorious assassin. A killer whose name he did not know, but whose actions were now a part of him. He had sought a simple solution to a simple problem, a debt to a street thug. Now, he was entangled in something far deeper, a world of corporate espionage and professional murder. He had inherited the memories of a ghost, and he had a horrifying feeling that the ghost's enemies were far more dangerous than the Rust dogs. He was no longer just Finn. And he was very, very afraid of the man he was becoming. The days that followed were a quiet, internal war. Finn tried to cling to the familiar routines of his life, but he was viewing them through a stranger's eyes. He attended his classes at the institute, sitting amongst the other students, but he could not focus on the lecture about atmospheric ion filters. Instead, the assassin's mind, a constant, quiet whisper in the back of his own, was analyzing the room. The professor's distracted air made him a low-threat target. The large student near the front had a posture that suggested military training. The emergency exits were poorly monitored. The air circulation system could be used to disperse a sedative agent. These thoughts were automatic, intrusive, and horrifying. He tried to suppress them, to force them down, but they were part of his new, terrifying instinct. The knowledge he had bought was not a tool he could pick up and put down. It was a lens he could not remove, a lens that painted the entire world in shades of threat and opportunity. He felt profoundly alone, isolated by the phantom in his own skull. He was becoming a stranger to himself, his own anxieties and fears now coupled with a cold, predatory logic that felt both alien and innate. He began to move differently. The clumsy student who once tripped over his own feet now navigated the crowded corridors of the institute with a fluid, unconscious grace, his body automatically adjusting to the flow of the crowd, maintaining a perfect sphere of personal space. He found himself choosing his path based on tactical advantage, his back to the walls, his eyes constantly scanning, tracking the movement of every person around him. He was a ghost, and the city was his hunting ground. The internal struggle came to a head one evening in the underlevels of Port Zenith. Finn was walking home through a narrow service corridor, a shortcut he now knew was a tactical mistake, a perfect place for an ambush. The thought had barely formed in his mind when two figures stepped out of the shadows in front of him, blocking his path. Another two emerged behind him. They were large, clad in the patched synth leather and rusted chrome that marked them as members of the Rust Dogs. And then Vex stepped forward, a cruel smirk on his face, a heavy, magnetic baton in his hand. "Look what we have here," Vex said, his voice echoing in the confined space. "The little student, all out of time. I'm going to have to collect my payment, Finn. With interest." The old Finn, the real Finn, was screaming inside. His stomach twisted into a cold knot of terror. His legs felt weak, his palms were slick with sweat. He wanted to run, to beg, to curl into a ball. But his body did not listen. As Vex and his thugs advanced, a profound, chilling calm washed over him. The panicked screaming of the student was drowned out by the silent, efficient whisper of the assassin. His fear did not vanish, but it was compartmentalized, stored away like a non-essential file. His senses sharpened. The corridor was no longer a trap, it was a weapon. He noted the precise distance between the two thugs in front of him. He saw the way the one on the left favored his right leg. He heard the slight hiss of a faulty cybernetic joint in the thug behind him. He registered the arc of Vex's baton as he raised it. All of this information was processed in a fraction of a second. "This is your last chance, kid," Vex snarled, taking another step forward. Finn's body moved. It was not a decision. It was a reaction. As the first thug lunged, Finn pivoted on the ball of his foot, a small, economical movement. He did not block the punch. He flowed around it, his hand shooting out, not as a fist, but with his fingers stiff and straight. He struck the thug's throat, a precise, calculated blow to the vagus nerve. The man choked, his eyes wide with shock, and collapsed. Finn became a horrified passenger in his own body, watching a ballet of brutal efficiency unfold. The second thug swung a pipe, and Finn's arm moved in a blur, deflecting the blow not with force, but by redirecting its momentum. In the same motion, his other hand seized the man's wrist, twisting it at an unnatural angle. There was a sickening crack of bone, and the man screamed, dropping the pipe. The two behind him charged. Finn did not even turn fully. He took one step back, letting the first man stumble past him, and delivered a sharp kick to the back of his knee. The man's leg buckled, and he went down hard. The last thug hesitated, his face a mask of disbelief. That hesitation was all Finn's body needed. He closed the distance in a single step, drove his elbow into the man's solar plexus, and as the man doubled over, gasping for air, Finn brought his knee up into his face. It was over in less than 5 seconds. 4 of Vex's largest thugs were on the ground, groaning, disabled but not, he noted with some relief, dead. Vex stood frozen, his baton half raised, his smirk replaced by a look of stunned fury. He had seen street fights his whole life. This was not a street fight. This was an execution. Finn stood in the center of the corridor, his breathing even, his posture relaxed. But inside, his mind was a maelstrom. He looked at his own hands, at the men on the ground, and a wave of nausea washed over him. He had done that. Or the ghost in his head had. "What are you?" Vex whispered, a flicker of genuine fear in his eyes. Finn could not answer. He turned and walked away, his steps steady and silent, leaving Vex alone with his defeated soldiers. He had not solved his problem. He had escalated it. He was no longer just a debtor in Vex's eyes. He was a rival. A threat. And Vex was not the kind of man to let a threat go unanswered. The memory fragments started to come more frequently after that, no longer confined to the moments when he closed his eyes. They would bleed into his waking reality. He would be looking at a data slate in the library, and for a second, the text would be replaced by the image of a secret data transfer, strings of encrypted code scrolling past his vision. He would be eating in the refectory, and the taste of his nutrient paste would be replaced by the phantom taste of expensive whiskey in a high-class corporate lounge. He began to piece together the life of the man in his head. The Silver Shade, that was his call sign. He was not a common thug or a simple murderer. He was a specialist, an elite corporate operative. The memories were not just of assassinations, but of infiltrations, data thefts, and secret meetings in the gleaming towers of Port Zenith's corporate district. And his primary target, over and over again, was Omnicore Solutions. Finn saw memories of the Silver Shade meeting with a handler, a shadowy figure whose face was always obscured. He felt the assassin's growing suspicion, the feeling of being used for a purpose he did not fully understand. There was a sense of betrayal, of a mission that had gone sour. The Silver Shade was not just working for money. He was seeking something. Revenge, perhaps. Or justice. The knowledge was a dangerous burden. The more he learned, the more he understood that the Silver Shade had made powerful enemies. Enemies who operated not in back alleys with pipes and bats, but in boardrooms with private armies and corporate assassins. His fear of Vex began to seem almost quaint. The two worlds collided a week later. Finn was in his pod, trying to study, when his personal data slate chimed with an alert. It was a priority message from the Institute's administration. His tuition, which was already on a precarious payment plan, had been flagged for immediate collection. Confused, he accessed the student financial network. His accounts were frozen. All his access had been revoked. He had been effectively expelled. He knew instantly that it was Vex's doing. The gang leader could not beat him physically, so he had attacked him through the system, pulling strings with some low-level administrator he had on his payroll. It was a petty, vindictive move, but it was devastatingly effective. As Finn stared at the screen, another alert popped up, this one from a public news feed. It was a small, local crime report. A body had been found in the lower-level maintenance shafts. A data scrapper. The report mentioned his known alias, Glitch. A cold dread washed over Finn. Vex was cleaning up loose ends. He had killed the only person who knew where Finn had acquired his new abilities. And now, another message appeared on his screen. This one was anonymous, a simple line of text on a black background. It said, "We know what you are. We are coming." It was not from Vex. The tone was different. Colder. More professional. Finn's blood ran cold. Vex, in his anger, must have done something incredibly stupid. He must have dug into Finn's sudden combat prowess, and, not understanding what he was dealing with, sent an anonymous tip to the one organization that would be most interested in the reappearance of a ghost. Omnicore Solutions. The hunt was on. He was being hunted by the street gangs from below and a faceless corporation from above. He was trapped between the rust dogs and the ghosts of his new memories. He had to know the truth. He had to know how this story, the Silvershade story, ended. He fled his apartment pod, grabbing only a burner data slate. Guided by the assassin's instincts, he melted into the labyrinthine depths of the city, his mind racing. He needed to understand the data shard. He needed to find out why it held not just skills, but a soul. His instincts led him to the only place he could think of, a place where information was the only currency and no questions were asked. A hidden server farm in the city's forgotten underpinnings. There, he broke into a terminal, his fingers flying across the interface with a speed and confidence that was not his own, and began to analyze the root code of his own mind. He had to face the ghost head-on. He had to find the final, fragmented memory. The memory of how the Silver Shade died. As he worked, he felt them. The hunters from Omnicore. They were not clumsy thugs. They were silent probes in the network, methodical and relentless, sweeping the data streams for his signature. He could feel their approach like a drop in barometric pressure, a cold front moving in. Time was running out. He pushed deeper into the code, into the memories, searching for the end. And for the beginning of his own nightmare. He found it buried deep, behind layers of psychic trauma and corrupted data. The final memory. And he realized that Glitch had lied about one crucial thing. The shard was not a corrupted file. It was a piece of highly experimental, highly illegal technology. A soul trap. A device designed to create a perfect backup of a person's consciousness at the moment of their death. The Silver Shade had known he was walking into a trap, and he had come prepared to die. Finn braced himself and triggered the memory, letting it flood his consciousness. He was the Silver Shade again, for the last time. He was meeting his handler, the shadowy figure, in an empty warehouse down by the old industrial canals. The air was thick with the smell of rust and stagnant water. He knew it was a setup. He had uncovered the truth. His handler was playing both sides, using him to eliminate Omnicore rivals while secretly working for the company's own internal security chief, a ruthless man named Morian. The Silver Shade had become a liability. "It's over," the handler said, his face finally visible in the dim light. He looked ordinary, a man you would pass on the street and instantly forget. "Not yet," the Silver Shade replied, his voice calm. He could feel the Omnicore security team surrounding the warehouse, their energy signatures appearing on his internal sensors. But he had one last card to play. He knew he was going to die, but he was not going to go quietly. In the seconds before the ambush was sprung, he activated two systems. The first was the soul trap, the obsidian shard that would capture his consciousness. The second was a dead man's switch. He had compiled a lifetime of Omnicore's darkest secrets, every assassination, every illegal operation, every betrayal, into a single, massive data bomb. He had linked its trigger to his own life signs. Upon his death, it would not be broadcast. It would be buried, encrypted and hidden within the soul trap itself. A poison pill. A legacy of vengeance waiting for a new host. The doors to the warehouse crashed open. The Omnicore team stormed in, clad in black armor, rifles raised. The Silver Shade did not fight back. He simply stood there, and as the bullets tore through him, his last conscious thought was not of anger or fear, but of cold, calculating victory. The seed had been planted. The memory ended, and Finn was back in his own mind, in the dark, humming server room. He understood everything now. He was not just a student with an assassin's memories. He was a walking time bomb. He held the key to the ruin of the most powerful corporation in Port Zenith. He was the Ghost's final weapon. The hunters were close now. He could feel their net tightening. But for the first time since this nightmare began, he did not feel fear. He felt a sliver of the assassin's chilling calm. He was the prey, but he was also the predator. He logged into the public network using an anonymous relay. He did not contact a news agency or a rival corporation. He sent a single, encrypted message directly to the office of Morian, the head of Omnicore Security. The man who gave the order to kill the Silver Shade. The message was short. It contained a single, small data file, an insignificant piece of code from one of the operations only the Silver Shade and Morian could have known about. A ghost's greeting. And then, a line of text. "I have the rest. The hunt is over. We need to talk." He cut the connection and leaned back, a single bead of sweat tracing a path down his temple in the cool, dark air of the server room. The hum of the countless machines around him was a comforting, steady drone. He had set his own trap. He did not know if Morian would respond with a bullet or a conversation, But the game had changed. He was no longer running from the past. He was leveraging it. He looked at his hands, the hands of a student that had learned the work of a killer. He was Finn, and he was the Silver Shade. And together they were going to survive. He closed his eyes, and for the first time, the quiet whisper in the back of his mind did not feel like a threat. It felt like an ally.